live. Oh no, we're not. We're not live yet. Okay, now we're live. Hold on, we're about
Good.
to be live.
As long as you can, as long as you're able to see everybody, we're fine.
And we're live. It's Monday, August 8th, 5:04 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah.
I can't think. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Jack Balkin on the show again. Always a pleasure, Jack. It is so great to see you. And
You know what today is, by the way? You may not remember this. This is the anniversary of Nixon's announcement that he was going to resign the presidency.
Oh.
8th. And I remember it. I remember it well. So when August 8th comes around, I always think they finally got Richard Nixon.
I saw today that it was also the 18th anniversary of the day that the Dave Matthews Band tour bus emptied its internal bathroom onto the Chicago River, and an underpass of like people on a pleasure cruise were showered in 800 pounds of excrement. But I would actually say that the Nixon thing is probably like a bigger deal.
Wow. Well, we'll see. Okay.
But sorry, I learned that from Twitter today. That site can't believe it's free. So, Jack, we're gonna start, I think, with Scott's suggestion.
All right.
A Scott suggestion because it's just too good, and then I think it is probably going to lead us into what I was initially going to start with, which is the discussion about like the future of the Supreme Court post Dobbs, everything else that's going on. But Scott, you had a question for Jack.
Yeah. So actually, Oren Kerr, also on that free website, Twitter, pointed out that Jack and Riva Siegel edited a volume, and Jack tells me in 2009, called "The Constitution in 2020," and I was wondering how what the experience now, looking back, what did you feel like you guys were overly naive? Were you appropriately pessimistic? What did you find? How has the world confirmed your ideas, and how has it undermined them?
Also, just really quick, are you aware of the adage, if you want to make God laugh, announce your future plans? Like when you wrote this?
Well, this was an attempt to try to give a progressive vision of the Constitution that might occur. Remember, this was written, the conferences were all done in the middle of the second George Bush administration, when it was assumed that, well, Republicans were going to control things for a very long time. And so this was during a period in which progressives were out of power. This is the chance for them to basically imagine what the kind of constitutional regime they want. Now, there is a precedent for this. I had mentioned this before in the pre-show, that the Reagan Justice Department did a white paper called The Constitution in 2000, which was essentially, here are the cases we want to overturn. Here are the cases we want to cut back on. Here's how we want to change constitutional law. And if you go back and read that white paper, what you'll discover is they got a lot of what they wanted. But the reason they got a lot of what they wanted is they were able to control appointments to the federal judiciary. That was something that Sandy Levinson and I call partisan entrenchment. So if you think about it, from 2000 onward, the Republicans have been able to get lots of appointments to the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts. They've taken advantage of it. And so they have been in a position to basically enact their dream program. If you look at the 2000 document, it says, let's deep six the Establishment Clause. Let's boost the rights of evangelical Christians. Let's get rid of Roe versus Wade. Let's cut back on criminal procedure protections. Let's get rid of affirmative action. That one's coming up next term. And
cancel culture.
Well, they didn't call it cancel culture in those days, but
Oh, okay, but
but if you think about it, if you think about it that way, the control of the courts has been crucial to whose blueprint for the Constitution has won out. And the Constitution in 2020, which was a series of very interesting essays by folks on lots of different areas, it's not going to be enacted largely because progressives don't control the courts. They're unlikely to for some time to come.
wow.
Wow, this is an amazing lineup of people that wrote.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, like everyone whose opinion.
I mean, like, there's not a single name I don't recognize. Like in this, like this is incredible. Wow.
Let me. So while you were doing it, right? So this is really was a normative exercise, kind of, or like an exercise in ideal theory.
Well, ideal theory, but if you ever got the influence over the construction of constitutional law, you need to have a plan, and that's exactly what the Reagan folks were doing in the Office of Legal Policy. They said, right, out of it, you need to know what to do with it, and so that was the idea. The idea was to basically create a series of ideas to play with. There's some great, some things. So, for example, people obviously were arguing in favor of same-sex marriage. Well, that came into fruition, but that came to fruition largely because of larger political forces in the country.
Right. Just can I just ask you from a descriptive point of view? Okay. Yeah. At that point, did you think, did you think that the conservatives would have been this successful?
There was no way of knowing. I remember a conversation with our colleague Dan Markovitz in 2004, in which Dan was basically telling me, it looks like these people are going to be in power forever. So this was in the middle of the first Bush administration. So if you look at things from 2003, 2004, right after the beginning of the Iraq War, you might well have thought that Republicans would have some degree of political hegemony for a long time. That was certainly what Karl Rove hoped for. But guess what? It actually didn't happen that way because, as we know, Bush's popularity cratered in his second term. Obama comes in, but then nobody predicted Trump and the way in which Trump changed the trajectory of the Republican Party. So nobody's predictions, I think, were, turned out to be correct. I think Karl Rove didn't expect Trump. Yeah. I think he assumed that there would be a series of Republican presidents kind of like George W. Bush, and that's the direction the party would take. And that's certainly what he wanted to happen, but that's not what happened.
Do you think that the situation that we're facing right now is a function of Trump having been in power, or any Republican? This is the same thing. I mean,
well, it's a very interesting question because in some ways Trump is a catalyst for certain forces that have been going on in the conservative movements and movements. It's not one single thing for some time. So there was always a tension between the business-oriented, low taxes, deregulatory side of the Republican Party, and also its war hawk, neoconservative, and then working class folks or non-college educated folks who really cared about cultural issues and a religion and protection of religion. And that tension was always there. And what you see happening with Obama's election is that the cultural side basically becomes dominant and Trump basically plays into it. And he basically senses that there is, how shall I say, a disturbance in the force. And he plays to that side of the Republican Party and he exacerbates it so that now the Republican Party is in a very complicated situation right now. There are significant parts of the Republican Party that have basically don't think that if they lose an election, the result is legitimate. They don't think that the opposition party is a legitimate party. And that wasn't going on 20 years ago. That's a new development.
So it's good that you leave it there, Jack, because I just went and fetched something that I found. As I mentioned, I'm moving and or I just moved to a new place. But this is a button that I used to wear in 2004.
Yeah.
And I literally think that you could just put re-elect Biden on the bottom now. Part of one of the things I thought that I've always, to your point, Jack, and to Scott's point, I've always obviously been found Trump to be important. I remember 2016, the day after election day, I was despondent, not just because of kind of what I saw it meaning for the norms of the presidency, but also because I did see that I was like, there's no way that RBG lasts 4 or more years. I just saw it as I saw it as the end.
This is a really nice transition. Thank you for saying it's a really nice transition. One thing that Trump really didn't make a difference, where he didn't make a difference, was the composition of the judiciary. That is, if it had been Marco Rubio or any of the people on the stage in 2000,
it was anyone.
The reason why is because the judicial wing of the Republican Party, that is the legal elites, those folks are basically Federalist Society folks.
Yes.
And those are the people from whom the judges are picked. And so if Marco Rubio or anybody else had been elected president in 2016, and you had gotten, 3 appointments, right? It's very likely the 3 appointments would have looked very similar to the 3 appointments we actually got. It's not clear that Trump really had very much of a say. And indeed, in order for Trump to show his bona fides with elites in the party, he basically said, look, these are the people from whom I'm going to pick. He did this twice in conjunction with the Federal Society and the Heritage Foundation, so that they would trust him. They would trust that if he became the standard bearer of the party, he would put these various elites in place. And these guys are the guys who basically culminated this conservative constitutional revolution. In that sense, Trump really isn't the driving force. It's the conservative movement. It's the legal movement.
And it was going to happen no matter any Republican that had been put in place.
I expect so.
I think that's right.
There are some things that might be different. As I said, Trump really pushed the party in the direction of populism, Christian nationalism, and those ideas. And so that may affect the agenda of the courts going forward. But really, Roe versus Wade has been the target of the conservative legal movement for over a generation now. And it was only a matter of time if you put enough movement conservatives. Not all the Republican appointees have been movement conservatives, but if you put enough movement conservatives on the court, you're going to get Roe versus Wade overturned. It was very funny when Gorsuch was at his hearings. They asked him, do you respect Roe versus Wade? He said, well, Roe versus Wade is settled law. And what do you mean by that? It's settled law in the sense that it is a precedent of the Supreme Court of the United States. That's it. That's all he was going to say. And so it was almost laughable. But here the guy was just basically saying it's settled law. But when he explained what settled law meant, you knew he was going to overturn it. And indeed, he voted to overturn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's important to distinguish between movement conservatives and earlier ones. So
why don't you give us a little bit of a definition for how you split those up? Because I don't think that these are things that you've expounded on with Sandy and other people, but it would be great if you kind of split that up.
Well, so the conservative legal movement is a movement that really gets started in the 80s. The Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation play a very important role in creating a network for like-minded people. And it's also a way of basically promoting people and getting them in positions in law firms, in judicial clerkships, in judicial positions. And the conservative legal movement is an elite movement. A lot of these people were educated in very schools. And they're different than the previous generation of folks who would become Republican judges. So let me give you some names. Harry Blackmun, John Paul Stevens, right? These guys are not movement conservatives. They are sort of moderate Republicans of the 1970s variety. And they were increasingly represented a shrinking part of the Republican Party. The future was with the new right and the conservative movement led by Reagan. And Reagan's Justice Department did a lot to nurture and grow a cadre of young, smart conservatives. In that Reagan administration were two young, smart conservatives named Sam Alito and John Roberts, for example. And I often tell my students that Hillary Clinton says it takes a village to raise a child. It takes 25 years and an entire legal network to raise Supreme Court justices. And that's exactly what you get.
That's a really great line. I will also point out that Harry Blackmun, author of Roe v. Wade, or delivered the majority opinion, right?
I want to point out, just to understand how the Republican Party changed.
Yeah.
Let's take two cases. Roe in 73, Casey in 92. Roe in 73, most of the justices in the majority were appointed by Republican presidents. So the Democrat-appointed justices were not the majority of the justices. They were mostly Republican-appointed. In Casey, which is the case that keeps Roe going, it cuts back on it. In Casey versus Planned Parenthood of Southeast Pennsylvania, every single justice in the majority voting to keep Roe was appointed by a Republican president.
Yep.
And now, of course, that's unthinkable. We would never imagine that 5 justices appointed by Republican presidents would vote to keep Roe versus Wade in place. That's because the nature of the party has changed, and earlier Republican presidents didn't have a stable, a farm team of bright young conservative members of the movement to choose from. They had to pick different folks, like Harry Blackmun. But now, nobody's going to get a judicial appointment from Republican presidents unless they're part of the movement.
Yeah.
Right. So there's two things. There's one future from the time that Trump that you're writing that you guys are talking in 2004, okay, of what a future conservative dominated court will look like, and the actual one that we have.
Right.
Okay. Is there what's the difference between the two? Is the
not all that much. I mean, if you asked legal conservatives at the turn of the 21st century, what do you want to do? What do you want to get rid of? The laundry list is pretty much the laundry list we're getting right now. It's just a matter of time for all the cases to line up. As I said, affirmative action is going next year. Roe is already gone. Abortion is already gone. The Establishment Clause has been hollowed out. The rights of religious Christians have been increased. That's slightly for what they imagined, but it's pretty much part of the course. The one thing that I think they didn't expect and they didn't win on was gay rights. That I think if you had asked legal conservatives in 2000, do you want to ensure same-sex marriage, they would have said, "Oh my goodness, no! That's exactly what we oppose," and they lost on that. The gay rights movement was successful. It was successful because it was a sustained social mobilization for rights, where people really spent a lot of time working at it. And that there's a lesson here, which is that the conservative movement won because of long, sustained mobilization in politics as well as law, and the gay rights movement won because of long, sustained mobilization in politics as well as law. So if you want, for example, reproductive rights to be protected, you know what you have to do. You're going to have to engage in a sustained mobilization in law and politics in order to protect those rights.
Kate, just to say, that's a really important lesson, which keep tweeting. Okay, just a sustained political action. I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
That is actually, Scott, very similar to what I was going to say, which I was going to disagree with you strongly, Jack. And this is, which is to say that I don't agree that the reason the gay rights is because there has been a long sustained legal and political battle over reproductive rights on the same scale, if not greater than gay rights. And we look where we are today.
It's a little different. Let me explain how it's different. You'll see.
Okay, but
we're both right in a way. I'm going to split the difference. In reproductive rights, the pro-choice forces had the courts as a backstop. That is, the courts were basically protecting the right. So there were certain kinds of laws that just couldn't get passed, or if they got passed, they'd be struck down. And so all of the mobilization energy was on the pro-life side because there was no court that was going to protect their interests.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so the point is that sometimes, this was also true of the gay rights movement before the California victory with Prop 8, which is the turning point in the movement for same-sex
And
marriage.
it starts with like Lawrence v. Texas.
Well, no, it starts in Romer in 1996.
Well, yes, but like
there's a long history of losing and losing and losing.
Yeah.
And it just takes a very, very long time. And the victories are few and far between. Many of them are at lower levels of society. And then it gathers steam. And as I said, I wrote this book on what Obergefell should have said. I wrote a historical introduction. It turns out that California is the battle. It's like the big battle that once there's this outcry against Prop 8, that's really what pushes the same-sex marriage mobilization over the top. It's reaction to Prop 8, you see, and the fact that the voters of California decide to overturn legal protection.
So I think that I'm going to make another argument about why California is so central, and it's because of the way that they control culture and the messaging that comes out of culture. And I really do think that the normalization, no one talks about reproductive rights on like Seinfeld. Like no one talks about, no one has like a whole show where they come out as like being on birth control, like in Ellen. Like there's like, I do think that I actually do think that like.
No, I understand your point. This is the point about the abortion closet. That is, there is a closet for abortion that doesn't exist in other cases. And indeed, the latest Guttmacher statistics suggest 18% of pregnancies will end in abortion.
Yes.
There's a lot of women out there
having abortions. Yeah. Or like, I mean, we're not even counting people on birth control, but like my point is even greater, which is like, I think that there's an interesting to tie it back. I think you're right. You were completely correct that the pro-life movement is like the equivalent in a way of the gay rights movement, in that they are railing against the system to change it, and that there is this kind of like wave after wave of trying to hit it until the courts give up. But kind of, I guess what I'm saying is that like, I do think I really do wonder, like with gay rights, there has been such a cultural sea change, and it is so talked about and so omnipresent in everyday society now, on television, on like in movies and like everything, that like, I mean, in our politics, I mean, like in 2007, I was covering, so like, anyways, go ahead.
Think about the way Hollywood portrayed gay people between 2005 and 2015. Increasingly friendly. Think about how Hollywood portrayed abortion.
I mean,
it's something you did not speak of.
It like still is not spoken of. Like, what is the line in Juno where she's like rhymes with schmortion? Like, and she decides to have like, I mean, that movie came out in like 2015. Like, I mean, where she like is a teenage girl and decides to go with adoption. She's like, she won't even say the word abortion. They don't even say the
word abortion. Let me just summarize what all we've been saying in this way. If you want constitutional change, the courts are almost the last place you look. You look at political mobilization, you look at popular culture, you look at changing the mores and values of society, and that if you win those battles, you're much more likely to win the battle eventually in the courts, because the courts are basically going to be pushed by these larger forces. That's certainly what happened with the gay rights movement, even though most Republican politicians and Republican judges didn't want them to win. But it turned out that they prevailed. The interesting question, the question that I'd be interested in what both of you think is, now pro-choice forces have been thrown back on their defenses. They have no courts to protect them. The abortion right is subject to a rational basis in con law, which means that essentially you can pass any law on that affects it. And so at this point, they have very little other than the political process and culture. What will happen?
What do you think, Scott?
Well, I mean, you know, the analogy between I mean, I'm not the first to make this analogy because it's obvious, but prohibition. So you have prohibition, this long sustained, like impassioned minority that cobbles together this coalition and then manages to change the Constitution, and like first of all, like everyone's unbelievable. First of all, no one kind of can believe it, and then it's like there's like everyone wants a drink, and also there's all the air goes out of the movement, right? Because they achieved the one thing that they were to achieve. So the question here, I guess the question is, does this movement, the pro-life movement, is it sufficiently integrated with other sorts of things like anti-gay rights or trans issues or stuff about sexual morality, such that it can keep on pushing forward? Or do people just all of a sudden say, wait a second, we can't get abortions? Wait, what, I mean, these people are crazy.
I have not heard that before, Scott. That is excellent. That is like I think that people don't, it's like one of these things that like people don't understand what it means to lose that type of liberty until all of a sudden it's gone. It's like a Joni Mitchell song about parking lots.
Right, exactly.
Right.
I mean, like, sorry, Jack.
There's another Joni Mitchell song about abortion. I thought you were going to reference that.
Yeah, no. This was, but I was trying to not be quite on the nose, but like, yes.
But one question to ask is whether or not the victory in Dobbs debilitates or strengthens the conservative movements, because there are many of them. I suspect that the movement for religious liberty in the face of gay rights is going to keep going strong from strength to strength.
Yeah.
That one is severable. But what's interesting is that from the standpoint of abortion, now the pro-life movement, I think, is at a crossroads, because a lot of folks agreed that abortion shouldn't be constitutionally protected. But now there are going to be disputes about, well, should we subsidize?
Well, how protected is it?
Should we protect infants? Should we invest in healthcare? And there will be disputes within the movement about these various questions.
Did you see the woman who got pulled over for driving in the carpool lane 8 months pregnant and is suing because she says that she was no, I'm not kidding. Like, she's literally doing this. Like, people are testing this at every single conceivable level. Yeah. And like, I mean, I'm not taking that seriously, but
well, let me give you a slightly different, what I think is a less amusing example. In Indiana and in other states,
yeah,
what we discover is people who are united on getting rid of Roe are not united over whether or not there should be exemptions for health, life, rape, and incest. And many politicians realize that the coalition that put them in power, a pro-life coalition, does not agree on these questions. And now they have to decide what position they're going to take on this. And now they have to take a position, and they can't see.
Oh, no. Jack!
What? That shows how powerful the coalition is.
It's so powerful. Oh, Scott, remind me that when he comes back, that I really want to ask him how you undo something like a movement, like a conservative movement. Like, how do you undo that? Like, how do we get back to a place of like Blackmans and Stevens and like those types of people?
But Kate, are you going somewhere such that you can't say that to him?
No, I just was I am like ADD brain.
And
so like,
gotcha.
The next thing he says will like make me like something else, and I'll forget to ask it. Hi, Jack. Sorry.
What I did was I exited the application, used the link, and came back in. And
oh, great! You're great.
Yeah.
So wait, you were in the middle of saying something that was very interesting.
But I was saying that the pro-life movement is a coalition of people with different positions.
Yes.
A bunch of different issues. As soon as they win on that issue, now the differences within that coalition start to appear. There are many Republican politicians who felt that they could take extreme positions on abortion because they knew nothing they suggested would ever become law. Now it can become law. And so now different parts of their constituencies will push them in opposite directions.
Yeah,
what are they going to do?
right. And I mean the danger is that I mean, this is a point that many people have made much better than I, but like abortion and healthcare are really intertwined and so therefore it's like going to be one horror story after another. And since these stories play and there's a popular, public opinion is on the pro-choice side, it's going to be just one bad thing after another. And yet, as you said, like they've taken extreme positions. I mean, people may like to hear extreme positions. They don't like to live them.
Here's another thing to think about. The Republican Party is as big as it is because Roe versus Wade was on the books.
Bingo.
That is
I was
say,
about to say this.
If you were moderately pro-choice, but you liked other things Republicans had to sell, deregulation of taxes, whatever it is, you could be a Republican and vote Republican because you knew that Roe was safe, that abortion rights were safe. But now you have a much more complicated thing you have to think about. You have to say, do I stay in the Republican Party, especially if they're becoming extreme on a bunch of other issues that are worrisome to me? Because, in fact, I can no longer trust that they won't do something that's irresponsible with respect to abortion rights. So often, this is a fact most people don't really understand. Mark Graber wrote a wonderful article about this in the 90s. And the basic point Graber made was this. Parties coalesce against the background of what they can and can't do constitutionally. That is to say, it's because Roe is in place, the parties organize themselves in one way rather than another. Once you take Roe away, the organization of the parties is put under severe pressure. And that's what most people don't understand. It's a role the Supreme Court plays in electoral politics that most people don't recognize.
That's brilliant. That's such an incredibly important and powerful and just really insightful point. I mean, not that you need.
Is this his constructing constitutional politics, the Reconstruction strategy for protecting rights, that piece?
No, this is something called the non-majoritarian difficulty. It was written years ago when he was a young man, Mark Graber. Here's the announcement he made, by the way, which I'll get, and I don't mean to go immediately there. I'm not saying that either Roe or Dobbs is Dred Scott. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is when the Democrats, before Dred Scott, you could be Stephen Douglas, who said, let territories decide by popular will whether they want to be slave or free. Or you could be a Southern, Colonel Beauregard, who said, we want, slavery everywhere. And you could be in the same party. Then the court decides Dred Scott. And one of the things Dred Scott says is, Stephen Douglas, you have no place in the Constitution. Your position is wrong. And at that point, Stephen Douglas can't be in the same party with Colonel Beauregard. Yeah. And the Democrats split. They become Northern and Southern Democrats in the 1860 election. And that's why Lincoln wins the election, because this is the whipsaw effect of Dred Scott, is it destroys the Democratic coalition. Now, again, I'm not saying Dobbs or Roe is Dred Scott. What I am saying is in both cases, the Supreme Court's decision affected how coalitions form.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
I think that's a wonderful point. I mean, like, both in this, like, especially in the specifics of it, not necessarily a Dred Scott. I just mean like the Graber point that this is how coalitions form. And also like the idea that you brought up before and that we've talked about kind of at length now, which is that being against abortion is this very broad blanket, right? And that there are like all of these, like being against Roe v. Wade as a federally protected right was like a 50-50 split for the country. And it turns out that the 50% that were like,
well, not 50, it was more like
40 or
the polling on supporting Roe, keeping Roe in place, around 60%. Remarkably, that is 60% of the country.
I always thought it was closer to like 55, 45 or something.
Nope.
Okay.
In fact, what's really interesting is I mean, just take the polling data. If you start with Roe in the 70s and you go all the way to the present, there are minor dips of 3 or 4 percentage points, but it's almost all, you about 60% support for abortion rights for very long. It's very stable, very long periods of time. There are certain periods when it goes down maybe 3 points, and then it'll come up some, but basically it was amazingly stable. It's very different than gay rights. In gay rights is very low for a long time, and then starting in the 90s, it began to slowly increase until it becomes majority support around the middle of the 2010s.
Right. Wow. Can I should we? I'm sorry.
We have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to start bringing people in. But
I'll tell you what, we didn't get to talk about Dobbs and the gun case. I'll come back another time and talk about them.
We would love that. Please do. That
Sure.
would be great.
I mean, if in fact Dobbs structures the Republican Party, and if it's 60-40, that's like a really bad thing for the Republican Party.
I've written about this many years ago about the fact that the Republican, I called it, Roe is the opinion the GOP loves to hate. That in some sense the GOP's coalition was helped by the presence of Roe versus Wade. Now Republicans have to rethink how they're going to win their voters. There are ways to do it, believe me. It's not like they're completely lost. It's just they're going to have to do a lot of thinking about what it means to be a Republican now and how you get people in the party and keep them in the party. It's going to be a problem for them.
Right, because the other problem is that they have to make sure that everyone who's in the party doesn't believe in democratic elections. That's a really tricky. Or at least 2020. You actually have to have it being.
You mean that fealty to the big lie is important among officials? I mean, a lot of people vote Republican for a lot of reasons. So I mean,
no, but I meant in terms of in terms of like what politicians. You were saying, for example, that Stephen Douglas had no place anymore in the Liz Cheney. The Liz Cheneys have no place anymore either, and so they're really cutting themselves. Like, talk about two really unpopular things, right? One is the non-pro-choice position, and that there was massive fraud in 2020.
Yeah,
so,
many establishment Republicans, are there any anymore, are hoping for a soft landing, in which basically they get past the Trump years and they move towards something that's a little less crazy, but they can still get majorities and keep winning. The problem is not everybody in the party wants a soft landing of the kind that they're imagining. That's a big fight.
I think that, so I think that that's maybe the only good news that we can take out of.
Good news for who?
Yeah, right. This is the lesson here is always lose your major battles, because
don't. I'm telling you, don't always.
Well, I mean, they're not like. Well, to be perfectly fair, like things like dreads, I don't know that there are like maybe it's just a longer journey.
History is full of irony. That is the way to take.
Yeah, I think that's right. Daniel Burge, it is so nice to see you. You had a bunch of questions. I feel like some of them have possibly been discussed or answered. So formulate whatever you think. I liked your, they're both great. So whatever you want to ask.
So I'll ask two questions, one of which is not on the Q&A box. The first is, do you think originalism is the equivalent to the economic theory that tax cuts will pay for themselves? And the second is more related to the current discussion, is why should we believe that voters are going to focus on the abortion issue in the midterms, and not Republican voters, that is, and not just focus on their hatred for Democrats and kind of push the abortion issue aside, because most voters don't think like the people on this screen.
Very.
As to originalism, we should do another one just on what's happening to originalism right now. It's a very complicated story. But as to the second one, the answer is we don't know yet whether or not abortion will turn out to be an important issue. Remember, it's not just Republicans; it's Republican-leaning independents who create a winning coalition in many districts, and so we're not quite sure yet whether or not abortion is going to be important to them. Some polling suggests it is, but come on, we're pretty far away from the election. 2 months is a lifetime in American electoral politics, and so the answer is we won't know for a while. I think many people were surprised that Kansas, which is one of my 2 home states, Missouri being the other one, that Kansas decided to support abortion rights, since Kansas, as we all know, is a state overrun with liberal feminists.
Phyllis Schlafly lived in the Missouri side of St. Louis.
Well, yeah, most of St. Louis is in Missouri. The last time
I know. Just driving that home. Sorry.
Yeah. But anyway, Kansas, which is a very conservative state, and in fact was a place where there were attacks on abortion providers. In Wichita, for example, is a place where you would not have expected abortion rights to win, but yet it did. That suggests something interesting is going on. And rather than predict, I'm just going to point out that we're not sure what's going to happen yet.
Yeah. I think that's, let's see, Mateo's up next. Hey, Mateo.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
All right. Here's my question. All right. I'm not trying to ask anything that gets an article in the Washington Free Beacon, but I do think this is related to what you've been talking about. And that is, what do you think the role of elite law schools and professors at elite law schools is during a period of a coordinated ideological mobilization of the sort that resulted in Dobbs getting overturned?
Well, it depends on whether or not these elite law professors are supporters of the mobilization or opponents of the mobilization. So I assume, since you referenced the Washington Free Beacon, you're thinking opponents of the mobilization. So there, I think that their job is to, offer intellectually respectable critiques, not engage in polemics, try to explain to students what's going on. In my own class, I spent a lot of time giving them the long stretch of history so that they understand that you have to put everything in a longer historical perspective. And I think that's the most important thing you can give students, especially since they're going to have a lot of different views about these questions.
I think my job in part is to mock the other side.
I have read your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
And why you might say that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that certain things need to be, so we had this conversation earlier, which was about con law. Like, I used to teach con law. I don't want to teach it again, just because it's reminiscent of this lesson I learned from Joseph Raz, who once said to me, never review a book that you have nothing positive to say about it. And I feel the same thing about like the last 15 years of the Supreme Court. It's just really hard. It would be hard for me to teach it straight. So I feel like I shouldn't teach it.
Oh, I think it's very easy to teach it straight, but that's because, again, I'm also teaching other periods in history I'm not very fond of either. I spent a very long time, again, I'm not comparing the current time to the previous time, but I spent a lot of time on the law of slavery before the Civil War. I spent a lot of time talking about how Reconstruction was undermined over a long period of time. I talk about the court in the Second Gilded Age that basically tried to, undermine workers' rights. So believe me, my course in constitutional law has long periods where the students are not happy about what's going on. And I think to teach the history of the Supreme Court honestly is to understand that the Supreme Court often has not been promoting social justice or justice for that matter, and that's an important part of its history. To know that.
So would you agree with this statement that so I found teaching con law earlier in my career really interesting because I thought that the Rehnquist court was intellectually quite fascinating. They were making moves that were really interesting and challenging. I kind of feel I don't have that same respect for the opinions of the Roberts Court. I would say in the same way of the intellectual output of the Rehnquist court. I mean, is that just
that's your opinion? It's not mine.
Okay.
So let's just take one case out of many. The Prince case. The Prince case is a key case in this federalism revolution of the Rehnquist court. It's all made up. Scalia is an originalist. He doesn't have an originalist leg to stand on. All of his arguments are not very good. If anything, the originalist arguments all go in the other direction. Didn't stop him. He knew where he wanted to go. Or take the affirmative action cases. Scalia's an originalist, but he completely refused to engage with all of the evidence suggesting that race-conscious remedies were permissible at the time the 14th Amendment was adopted. He just didn't care. He knew where he wanted to go, and that's where he was going to go. William Rehnquist, who was the Chief Justice at the time, Bill Rehnquist never, often wrote very cursory opinions where he just wanted to get someplace and he really didn't care how he got there. He didn't really think that language in Supreme Court opinions was all that important.
Yeah.
So I don't think that
I'm also not a huge fan of a ton of.
I don't think this Supreme Court is less good as lawyers.
You know what? I know what I realized actually now that first of all, because you just made an excellent case for like the originalism in a way has sapped the opinions from being about functional relationships between different parts of the system, state, federalism or separation of powers issues, to issues like what words were used in the in 1789. So in a way, that seems less intellectually interesting exercise.
Well, I think that there's a version of originalism. I mean, I'm an originalist of a certain form.
Right? No, that's right. Yeah.
Right. There's a version of originalism which is just antiquarianism, and it's not just antiquarianism. It's invented tradition. What Hobsbawm would call an invented tradition. It imagines what the past must have been like, so that it conforms with the values of the present. It's historical ventriloquism, and that kind of originalism I don't respect very much. I think it's bad history. I don't think it's I think it's badly done as legal argument. So yes, and to that extent we agree. I think antiquarianism is not. In fact, I have a derogatory term for it. I call it old-timey originalism. Boy, it was.
We go down to the corner store and get our penny candy and I
guarantee.
I don't have much support for this version of old-timey originalism because it's bad history. It's not intellectual respect.
Yeah. I think I think both of you bring that. Yeah. Much better than I've never taught con law. Thank the loving God. And so I definitely don't feel moved to do so in the given the last couple of months.
Right.
And so but Richard, you have the last question and then I have a question, but Richard, whatever you think is the best thing that you want to ask.
Oh boy, that's a toughie. Well, I'm gonna ask the first one because I've been dying. So Jack, I was wondering if you'd encountered legal academics, lawyers, judges, or others who, on the one hand, will espouse the textualist or more conservative originalist approaches to interpretation, yet when listening to music, they'd rather be eaten alive by wild beasts than trade their recordings of Furtwängler or Klemperer or somebody else who takes liberties with the score for North.
An article about this back in the old days.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I've read it.
But what we said in that article, which is the answer to your question, is that both the historically informed performance movement and contemporary originalism are an exercise in an imagined past. That is, what they were doing is imagining what the past was like and then saying, gee, they don't do it that way anymore. We should go do it the way they used to do it. And what they meant by the imagined past was a particular modernist aesthetic. This is what Richard Truscott points out, who's now just passed away. They liked clean textures. They liked small orchestras. They liked fast tempi. They liked those aesthetically, and then they just simply projected that onto the past and said, well, that's the way it was done then. That's the way we should do it. And in the same way, we have a version of historical ventriloquism by a contemporary conservative originalist. That is, it's old-timey originalism. That's the way it used to be. If we can only go back to the way it used to be, and not this newfangled stuff, which has no basis in the text or history of the Constitution. For those of you who remember the opening to All in the Family, where
didn't see that coming. But yes, like the Archie
those
Bunker.
were the days. Those were the days. Is a song sung by Archie Bunker and his wife Edith, and the lyrics are very much akin to old-timey originalism.
Oh yeah, that's right. Girls were girls and men were men. It was a very strong statement of gender critical feminism.
And like Herbert Hoover again.
Yeah, exactly. KK.
Yeah. Oh, my last question. I also, like, my dad used to give me such a hard time. There was like a character in All in the Family that he compared me to, like a strident liberal character, and I forget who it was, but he just like,
I'm not going to go there. I'm just not going to go there.
Yeah, I know. But anyways, my dad was like, you're just like blah, blah, blah. And like, I was like, okay, well, you're just like Alex, what's his face? And that other old show that I didn't watch. Like there was Michael J.
Alex
P. Keaton. Yeah.
Alex P. Keaton, yes.
Yeah. Anyways, but I was going to ask the question when you blipped out. I told Scott to remind me to ask you this because I would get distracted, and lo and behold. But I want to know. So, if we have like the movement conservatives, if we have this movement away from the Stevens and Blackmun's type of Supreme Court, how do we ever reclaim? Like, how do we ever get back to a stage in which that's not like in which we're not having movement conservatives or movement liberals or movement progressives appointed to the court? How do we reclaim this as like an intellectual space? Can we?
Oh, you twisted it at the very last minute.
I know I did that a little bit just to kind of provoke. Not intellectual. That was not fair. But like, you know what I mean? Like
one question is, do you want a Supreme Court where the justices are in no way influenced by the political movements and trends of their day? I suspect you probably need to hermetically seal them in a car, as Johnny Carson once said on Funk and Wagnall's porch. This is not,
wow, we're like full of the old-timey reference. I'm here for it. I just want to say I got that joke.
The more you study the history of the Supreme Court, the more you realize that the justices are part of the political system. They're not insulated from it. They do a different kind of thing. In other words, they don't do the same thing that legislators do, but they're part of the larger system of interlocking powers. They're always affected by the politics of their day. They're products of the politics of their day. They reflect the politics of their day. The problem we have here isn't that so much as we are, for a complicated set of reasons, invite me back, okay? And I'll tell you more about it. For a complicated set of reasons, this court, the middle of this court is way removed from the middle of the country. That is, very often you get a court that reflects in large measure, in a very loose sense, the middle of the country, and nobody's happy because they don't get what they want. This court's middle now is Brett Kavanaugh. He's the great moderate. Well, Brett Kavanaugh is many things.
Ain't no moderate.
He's not a moderate. And so what we have is a Supreme Court that's in some sense out of whack with the country's direction, and that creates problems. That creates problems of legitimacy. So you hear people talking about Supreme Court's legitimacy now, but I think this is the deeper question. Now, in the olden days, when justices didn't live so long or decided to get other careers, like run for office, this problem would sort itself out within a decade. But we live in a different world in which the justices, once appointed, stay on as long as they possibly can. And so we're in a situation now where this mismatch between the court center and the country center is likely to continue for a long time. And that is going to be a continuing problem. But ask that, talk more about it.
No, we were never going to ask you back, but since you withheld that information, we're going to have to ask you back.
Why don't we do Mondays with Jack for like August? Like that would just be fun. Like, your middle name is your middle initial.
It is Jack Balkin month on Lieu of Fun. August is Friday night is cheese night, and August is Jack Balkin month.
Yeah, the M in Jack M. Balkin stands for Mondays and or month.
There's an old Groucho Marx line. I'll take it up with my lawyer, and if he advises me to do it, I'll get a new lawyer. We'll work out the times and places later on. Anyway.
This was wonderful. We will be back on Wednesday. I don't know who the guest is, but until then, Scott.
We can't have fun anymore, but it's August, and that means it's Jack Balkin month.
There you go.
We can have him. Thank you so much, Jack. You were as always fantastic.